The clash didn't begin with a gentle disagreement. It erupted with Stephen Miller leaning forward, voice sharp, slicing into Jasmine Crockett's words before she had even completed her thought. The interruption was so sudden, so deliberate, that the entire room seemed to lurch with it. Conversations hushed, eyes darted, and for a split second, the chamber was thick with the kind of tension that only comes when power is being flexed, not with strength, but with arrogance. Crockett paused. Her gaze didn't flinch, but her silence spoke louder than Miller's intrusion. He kept pressing, cutting across her again, his tone dripping with the certainty of someone who believed the louder voice always wins. It wasn't the first time he had done this, and he carried himself as though it would be the last word. But in that stillness, there was a charge. Every person watching felt it. The injustice of seeing a black woman, a representative, spoken over as though her presence was an inconvenience rather than a right. The sting of it traveled through the air like static electricity. Viewers at home leaned forward. Phones were already coming out. Clips would soon find their way onto timelines, and yet Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't snap back. She simply held her ground with the kind of poise that makes arrogance look small. Miller mistook her composure for weakness. That mistake would cost him, because interruption after interruption was only sharpening the blade she held in reserve. With each dismissal, with each attempt to silence, the pressure built toward something inevitable. The moment she would no longer be interrupted but heard. He thought this would be routine. He thought she would fold, flustered under his repeated attacks. What Miller didn't understand was that Crockett's calm wasn't surrender. It was strategy. She was giving him space, letting him talk himself into a corner, setting the stage for a line that would not just answer him but end him. One interruption might have gone unnoticed. Two could have been brushed off. But by the time he cut her off 6 times, the audience knew what was coming. A reckoning. But this wasn't just an interruption. It was the spark to a clash that would echo far beyond that room. Because interruptions aren't just about broken sentences. They are about power. They are about who gets to speak and who must stay silent. And in that chamber, the symbolism was impossible to miss. Every time Miller cut across Crockett, it wasn't only her voice he was trying to push aside. It was the chorus of women, of people of color, of communities who have fought for centuries to be heard in the halls of power. His voice carried the entitlement of someone who had always assumed the stage belonged to him. Her silence carried the resilience of those who had been denied that stage and claimed it anyway. This is why the confrontation mattered. It wasn't just another heated moment in politics. It was a mirror, reflecting back to America the familiar image of arrogance trying to drown out dignity. Miller's history of dismissive tactics made it clear this wasn't accidental. He had built a reputation as someone who wielded interruption as a weapon. To him, dominance was measured not in truth, but in volume. And yet, every time he cut across Crockett, the audience online stirred louder. Clips spread like sparks across the timeline, captions reading, "Watch how many times he tries to silence her." Viewers weren't just watching an exchange. They were counting the interruptions, building the anticipation for a payoff that had not yet come. And when he did it again, jaws dropped. Stephen Miller had always been cast in the same shadow, the cold strategist, the calculating architect of harsh words and harsher policies. His manner was clinical, but his delivery carried arrogance. He played the role of the immovable force, but behind the facade lay contradictions. He claimed strength, yet his every tactic leaned on cutting others down. He demanded respect, yet he never offered it. His entire persona was built on the illusion. The power belonged to those who spoke the longest and the loudest. The image he projected was of control, yet it was brittle control. When confronted with voices he could not bend, his instinct was to break them. That instinct had defined him for years, earning him notoriety as combative and unyielding. But reputation can be a cage, and arrogance has a way of blinding a man to the moment when the script no longer bends to him. Miller was too convinced of his dominance to see the storm gathering across the table. But across the table sat someone who had lived through struggles he couldn't begin to imagine. Jasmine Crockett's story was not one of entitlement. It was one of resilience. She had carried the weight of struggle, of proving herself again and again in spaces not built to welcome her. She had faced the unspoken barriers, the coded doubts, the outright dismissals that come when a black woman dares to claim her seat in power. Each scar, each battle, each moment of doubt she overcame had built not just a politician, but a fighter for justice. Her voice wasn't only her own. It carried neighborhoods, families, and generations who had insisted on being heard. It was the voice of communities often spoken over, now refusing to yield. She had fought for justice not because it was convenient, but because it was necessary, and that fight had forged in her a steadiness that interruptions could not shake. Miller thought he was rattling her composure. In truth, he was testing steel. Crockett's calm was not emptiness, it was conviction. She had endured louder storms than his voice could ever summon, and that is why she would not break under pressure. So when Miller cut her off again, he wasn't just interrupting Jasmine Crockett, he was interrupting every voice she carried with her. One interruption, then another. The pattern was relentless. Each time she opened her mouth, Miller lunged in with the same jagged tone. the same certainty that volume would win over substance. By the fourth time, murmurs spread through the audience. By the fifth, tension wrapped the room like a coil ready to snap. By the sixth, the outrage was palpable. Viewers watching online weren't just frustrated, they were furious. Social media was buzzing mid-hearing, captions boiling with the same refrain, "Let her speak." Crockett, however, remained measured, her posture firm, her tone controlled. She didn't let the fire he tried to ignite consume her. She let it fuel her resolve. With each interruption, she grew more unshakable, her silence a mirror reflecting his desperation back at him. He wanted her rattled, but his own composure was beginning to fray. It was in those 6 attempts to silence her that the true drama unfolded. The audience was no longer neutral. They were invested, frustrated, waiting for release. The tension had reached its peak. Everyone knew something had to break. And then, after the 6th, Crockett finally leaned in, and that's when everything changed. Her 7th line did not burst out like a shout. It landed like a stone in still water, quiet, deliberate, rippling outward until it silenced the entire room. She waited until the last of Miller's words tumbled over hers. Then, with the calm precision of someone who had been building toward this moment, she spoke. The sentence cut clean through the noise, sharp not because it was loud, but because it was undeniable. It was the kind of line that pulled air out of the chamber, leaving nothing but its echo. The pause that followed was electric. Miller, who had been so quick, so insistent, was suddenly motionless. His mouth, once overflowing with interruptions, froze. His eyes flickered with the realization that the control he thought he had wielded was gone. The power dynamic had shifted in an instant, and everyone felt it. The audience gasped, then burst, some into applause, others into stunned silence. Onlookers leaned forward, their disbelief giving way to exhilaration. Cameras caught every angle, and within seconds, the clip was destined for replay, meme, and headline. What Miller had tried to bury under his interruptions was now the only thing anyone would remember, because Crockett's 7th line wasn't just a response, it was a verdict. It wasn't a counter-argument, it was closure. In one sentence, she had reframed the entire confrontation, stripping Miller of the bluster he mistook for strength. His interruptions, once so forceful, now looked desperate. Her words, once delayed, now stood immortal. And while the room was stunned, the internet was about to explode. Twitter lit up within minutes. Hashtags trended, "Leatherspeak," Crockett 7th, "Silence no more." Clips of Miller's interruptions spliced against Crockett's devastating final line circulated like wildfire. Memes mocked Miller's arrogance, painting him as the man who lost, an argument he wouldn't let finish. Commentators weighed in, calling it the takedown of the year. Celebrities shared the moment with captions of admiration. Supporters flooded her mentions, not just praising her composure, but celebrating the victory as their own. In living rooms, group chats, and community centers, people replayed the clip with pride. For them, it wasn't just Crockett's triumph, it was symbolic. She had faced the dismissive force they had all encountered in some form, and she hadn't just survived it. She had turned it into a moment of power. Miller's image, once projected as unshakable, was reduced to a punchline. Crockett's elevated into inspiration. But beneath the memes, a deeper question lingered. Why did this one exchange matter so much? Because Crockett herself framed it that way. In her reflection afterward, she didn't reduce it to Miller's arrogance or her own victory. She spoke of something larger: dignity over disruption, truth over arrogance, respect over ridicule. She reminded America that democracy depends not on who shouts the loudest, but on whose voice carries justice. She turned a clash into a lesson, a confrontation into a parable, and in doing so, she gave the moment back to the people watching. She reminded them that what had unfolded wasn't just about her, nor about Miller. It was about all of us, about whether we believe arrogance wins by default or whether resilience can still prevail. Her words lifted beyond the chamber, beyond the headlines, into something timeless. And that's why her 7th line wasn't just an answer to Stephen Miller. It was an answer for all of us. Stephen Miller interrupted Jasmine Crockett 6 times, but history will only remember the 7th, because in that instant she reminded the world that dignity cannot be silenced and truth cannot be interrupted. That is why this story matters. That is why this video matters. Share it, pass it on, because the more we carry moments like these, the stronger we all become. If you believe in voices that cannot be silenced, subscribe, join us, and stand on the side of dignity. Because when arrogance tries to shout down justice, let this moment remind us: it only takes one clear, steady voice to change everything.